Hello everyone. Today I'm continuing on with my 1972 year-long series looking back at the films of 50 years ago. What were they like? How do we look at them today? Or at least how I look at them today, because most of these movies I've seen, I saw back in 1972. Not today's movie though. As I'm concentrating on horror films today, I'm going to tackle another Giallo movie from Italy, Don't Torture a Duckling. And this was directed by Lucio Fulci. And this is an Arrow release with absolutely great supplements. Whatever I might feel about the movie, the supplements were worthwhile this purchase. And when you buy pricey Blu-ray editions, you certainly hope they put enough supplements in, and Arrow certainly did the job on this release. And it is set in a rural town, so as Giallos are normally set in a big city, this is set in a rural town, and it is in southern Italy. And that's significant because, especially in the films of the 1970s, and I presume even today, there is such a great divide between North and South. It's almost like in the United States pre-Civil War. It's like two different countries. Young boys, 10 to 12 years old, are being killed, and they're being killed without molestation. There seems to be no motive whatsoever to these deaths in this rural town. The police come from the outside. They're local police who know the ins and outs of the kind of life of of this kind of southern rural town. But then the police come from the outside to help with the investigation. And so we have a further amplification of this, of the modernity versus people stuck in old traditions where change has not come, whereas the economic miracle in Italy of the 1960s has hit the cities. So there is that great divide where the locals are wary and distrustful of the outside police, and the police just don't understand what's going on. How can these people be so backward? And in the opening scenes of the film, we see young boys playing underneath a elevated interstate highway. These are highways connecting the city to a resort area or cities to other cities. These are the flyover, the passover kind of part of Italy, or part of probably any country in the world, where people seem to be not a part of that modernity. They don't seem to, they seem to be almost like they're forgotten. And this is really visually amplified by these tall towers that are, because this is a really elevated highway that runs over the town and the outskirts of the town, in a kind of a desolate landscape. And the town has, as all these kind of small towns have, a village idiot. They have a witch played by Florinda Balkan in an absolutely fantastic performance. She is just great I mean, this is a role. This is a real meaty kind of role for any actress, and she got along very good with Lucio Fulci, and she was willing to provide him with this extra oomph in her performance. And again, we also, back to this rural and big city, modern city, we have, in The Witch, we have this element of the supernatural. And both these characters, the village idiot and the witch, are prospective suspects in the deaths of these young boys. And then we also have the riches of the North come into play, or the big cities. They come into play with the presence of a young woman who has sort of been exiled from the big city because she's been a bad girl. She's presumably in her 20s. And she's living alone in the family estate. Her father evidently was part of this small town, but then he moved to the big city, made his money, and So she's there all alone, and she evidently wants to reform. And she's played by Barbara Boucher. And then we also, as in the other Giallos that I've seen, we have a dual investigation. We have an investigation by the police, which is seen mostly in these movies, is seen as inept. You know, they really don't know what they're doing. So we have what is ostensibly the star of the movie, Thomas Millian, who plays a reporter who is also from the outside. And he launches his own investigation and sort of teams up with this rich girl played by Barbara Boucher. So the movie was a hit in Italy, never released in the United States. It didn't appear in the United States until 1999 on VHS and DVD. And this is shock cinema. And there are two scenes in this film that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes that are probably the reason why this film was not. I don't think it was released in Britain as well. I think in the commentary, I think he says that big hit in Italy and it was a hit in France, but it barely played in other countries in the world. And there's a great, as part of these great supplements, there is a conversation with Michael Coven, who wrote a book called Vernacular Cinema and the Giallo. And this is the context that he provides for Giallo movies and who the audience was for Giallo movies. And by vernacular cinema, he's talking about a type of movie that is made for distracted audiences. These are movies that did not play. Giallos didn't play in the A movie theaters, the B movie theaters. They were pretty much in the C movie theaters, sort of like grindhouse cinema in the US. So average people, middle class people, upper class people, they had no idea what these movies were. So it played to a rural audience or a city audience that would be probably more or less in working class areas. And they were intended, or at least the audience went to them in order to see shock cinema. And they were distracted. Cohen describes a typical audience, they're there to talk to each other. There's all kinds of talking going on, all kinds of make-out couples, there's drug use, and they don't pay attention to much of the movie. They're busy talking with each other, and then the movie provides the shock. And then everybody is, wow, look at this. This is something you've never seen before. In 1972, you haven't seen these things before. Now, in the 50 years since, shock cinema is, you know, sort of everybody's been accustomed to them. Not me, because I've not watched a whole lot of it, but I assume fans of it, you know, would not be as shocked today as audiences would be in 1972. And so the irony, of course, is that as far as physical media collection, these are the films that sort of drive it. The Italian movies playing in the A and B level cinemas probably don't drive, you know, outside of maybe the Criterion collection. They're not going to be nearly as popular today, which is really kind of a strange thing, that these schlock movies, of course, they've been popularized by Quentin Tarantino for sure, and the grindhouse movies as well, that there's a whole lot to them. And there is indeed a whole lot to Don't Torture a Duckling besides the shocks, because he is making a commentary on social problems. Fulci was a Marxist. He was a member of the Communist Party. He had you know, a great distaste for modern society. For this, so it's a product. It's a commentary on social problems, on gender problems. He's presenting a culture clash in a way that can seem kind of nihilistic, that there is kind of a hopeless situation, sort of a hell on earth. And and we learned in the supplements that in this period in Fulci's life, he had some personal tragedies. His wife, a couple years before he made this film, I think it was, his wife committed suicide. And then shortly thereafter, one of his daughters died in an automobile accident. So this is a very pessimistic, dark film in his view of human relations. And there's, and also included in the supplements is just a brilliant video essay by Kat Ellinger. This is the first time I've ever seen one of her video essays. I'm very familiar with her commentaries, which are always great to listen to because you never know what direction she's going to go off in. But this is a really well-balanced, essay defending Fulci against the accusations of misogyny. It's a statement on male. She sees these violent scenes, and one of the two violent scenes is violence against women, against a woman, and she claims Fulci is intending to show how awful males are towards women. Male violence is towards women, but it's very explicit in the movie. So the violence, and I'm going to describe it a little bit in a couple minutes, but she's very eloquent, very convincing, but I'm not totally convinced of what the intent of the director is to expose the apparent intent is to expose the violence that men inflict on women. But whatever the intent is, it's sort of playing to the misogynist fantasies of the male audience. If you see men as inherently misogynist, this is a male fantasy, is what he is presenting. So are they getting this? Oh, look how terrible we are towards women. Are they? Wow! Isn't violence in movies are just so cool? And that this is sort of the genesis of the coolness of violence that Tarantino has really made palatable to more mainstream audiences. Violence, cinematic violence, is cool to watch. It's exhilarating. And I'm reading a book by Stephen Prince on it's called Savage Cinema, where Sam Peckinpah had a similar intent. He wanted his violence in The Wild Bunch, the balletic killings that involved, scores of blood squibs that explode on people's on the characters' bodies and then presented in slow motion. He wanted a catharsis. Violence is so terrible. We've got to do something about the violence. So he thought his intent, as he says, as he defends the Wild Bunch, was for catharsis. But in interviews in subsequent years, he admitted, that people were either repulsed by the violence and then they had to leave because they found it so repulsive, or the rest of the audience that stayed, or at least a good part of them, would be enjoying it, exhilarated by it. It's kind of like a drug, a high. Again, playing to male fantasies, so I'm going to talk about the two scenes. So if you've never seen this film, and you're still with me, you might not want to listen to this. Now, you're going to get shocks in shock cinema, but maybe you want to see this. You don't know what actually is the shock that's coming up. Or if you decide, is this the kind of movie I can actually endure? In the first scene, it doesn't involve physical violence, but the scene comes early on where we see Barbara Boucher. She is the rich girl. She's lounging on her couch in her house, totally nude. And the 10 or 12-year-old boy of her servant, he's the son of the servant, is told to go bring her some orange juice. So as he goes in, he sees her, and of course she's totally nude. What's really uncomfortable about the scene is the way the character is portrayed as being flirtatious with the boy, asking him questions, almost as a kind of seduction. And, certainly the scene is there, at least partly, so that the audience, and especially the men in the audience, can get a gander at Barbara Boucher's naked body, and believe me, it's spectacular. But then she gets up off the couch and she approaches the young boy as if she's about to seduce him. So there is like, how far is this movie going to go with this uncomfortable scene? Now, there is a shot in the movie where we see the boy from the back with it's in the same frame as Barbara Boucher, but then Fulci was called on the carpet by the authorities. The boy was actually in this room with this naked woman? He said, no, we used, I guess he used the word that was common in those days. We used midget for the boy, and when I watched it with the commentary, it's clearly not the young boy. But the editing and the way that it's edited and the reactions of both Barbara Boucher and the young boy, it's very not just uncomfortable, but it's believable that they're actually in the same room. What was the purpose of the scene? Like I say, of course, Barbara Boucher, who had no inhibitions about taking off her clothes in this movie or other movies, and that I couldn't relate that scene to any other, artistic intent of Fulci. But the other scene in the movie is violence on a woman done by 4 men who whack her around at least a half a dozen times. We see it in explicit detail with a chain or a pole. And we see the blows, and then we see the skin, the contusion and the blood, and the skin being rent apart in great detail. And this scene is a long scene, and this is the scene that you wonder whether what the intent of the scene and what the audience reaction would be to the scene might be 2 different things. So, I mean, and this was the scene that also in the Wild Bunch, people left the audience, the people in the audience left the theater during these ultra-violent scenes. And there, in the supplements, it was said that there was a considerable amount of people who left during this scene as well. And this is indicative of the point I was trying to make, that the intent of the scene might be different than the way it actually plays in the movie. And we get, also in the interviews, or in the supplements, we get interviews with, one is with Florinda Balkan, and fairly recent interview. She had never seen that scene, and they force her. I mean, she's doing this with good humor. You want to watch the scene? Oh, I don't want to watch it. But then we watch her, we see the scene in one half of the screen, and then we see her reaction to it. And she is just horrified. Oh, this is such a horrifying scene. I can't watch anymore. But then she does actually watch the whole scene. So overall, this is one of those movies where I found that the supplements were more enlightening than the movie itself, or at least I was enlightened by these supplements. We get other interviews. I have to say that one of them is with the makeup artist, and I found they were using dummies, and there's another scene of violence that's just so clearly fake. But overall, I mean, it's a great transfer. If this is your kind of film, this is considered one of the 10 great Giallo films of all time. And Troy Hayworth, who provides a very good commentary and has written a book on Giallo cinema, claims this is his favorite Giallo and one of his all-time favorite movies as well. So it's up to you. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.